Absolutely delighted here to be, I said I'm going to interview Ian Rowe, who to my mind is a Renaissance man, right? Because not only has he written books, but he's like set up things and done things and focuses on things like agency that I love and think are really important.
Well,
but Ian tells me I want to talk to me too.
Yes, exactly. You're
so it might not be a conventional interview. And after about 40 minutes or so, we want to include you guys in the conversation and take your questions and points as well. So, Mike's already introduced you, Ian. It was terribly impressive. And you're also a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
I am, yes.
So many hats. That's what I mean about a Renaissance man.
No, just Jamaican, like 7 jobs.
Good work ethic. That's what we like. Perhaps we can just start off with telling us a bit more about. I'm always intrigued why education, and the linked thing is. The question is, I believe you're a dad of young kids.
I am a dad of a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Okay,
so I'm very in that last panel.
Yeah.
Very much hit home, and I'll share the story. In June of this year, my 10-year-old, who's in 4th grade, in class one day. The principal came into the class with one of his fellow students, a male student, who's been a male student for the entire time they've been in 4th grade. And the principal, I'm told, said, this boy name is now a girl, and so therefore has to now be called this female name. And it was quite an amazing thing, because my son came home later that day and said, so-and-so was a boy before, and he's still a boy now, and just rejected it. But the thing that really struck me about it was the social pressure that this child is now under because of all of the adults, or several of the adults in their life are now almost creating a social expectation of what they now have to conform to. Yeah. And that's something, someone asked that question, and I think it's very powerful. So these kinds of things are very real, but I do agree with the idea that we still have to show empathy. I think one of the things that's often missing in these kinds of debates is that we can become so maybe perceived as so harsh and militant. We're not taking into account that kids are going through real struggles. So how can we both simultaneously show empathy for a child who may be experiencing gender dysphoria or some other underlying condition that sort of presents itself as, so having empathy, but still not confusing the entire rest of the population of kids, that there isn't something absolute like biological sex. So anyway, so these issues are very relevant. You're kind of
preempting my questions here, but what?
Sorry.
Just following on from that, then, how would you like that your son's school to have responded to that child that perhaps went to the teacher or head and said, distressed, I think I am actually a girl?
It is a good question. The moderator that was here before, I think she even said she struggles with this all the time, because it is a real thing. I ran a network of all girls and all boys schools, elementary and middle school, for 10 years. And so there are students that do present this issue. Now, it is true that over time, the vast majority of cases resolve in ways, and I think we just have to be honest about that. I think the role of the school should be that we're not putting our thumb on the scale in any direction. That last panel was incredible. I learned so much, but this idea in other countries, the intervention seems to be psychotherapy that is not necessarily run by the school, but it's something that the family has to do. It's sort of watchful waiting, I think, is the term, that a kid could be facing anxiety for a lot of reasons. We are just happening to put particular focus on this area, and I just think the school can't be party to a series of decisions that could literally result in some of the things that we just talked about. Puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, even again, social transition, this kind of commentary starts to create this expectation on the part of kids. So I'm now on the school board in my hometown, so these are things that we're going to be talking about. This idea of do no harm, I think is really powerful, particularly as it relates to this sort of immediate gender-affirming position is not necessarily the best things for kids. And so do no harm, I think, is the right approach.
Okay, so my questions are going to go out of the window now. I want to follow on from that. Do no harm. Now, what would your, playing devil's advocate, what would your response then be? Well, this is what I get when I argue a similar line. You say do no harm. That sounds great, Alka. But these people are having harm done to them by societal norms outside. Surely, as a responsible, as a educator, you want to, you want to do something more proactive. I mean, doing no harm, in other words, just can sound a bit just sort of wimpy, like value-free, like just sort of, sort of me.
It can. I could see how that. I think the way that you would respond to that is, kids can be. I mean, I've just opened up a new high school with 14-year-olds who are coming in with an unbelievable array of issues that they're dealing with, like crippling things, and again, gender dysphoria may just be one. And the thing that at least in the schools that I want to lead, we're not putting kids in categories where you're assuming that because of a gender identity, because of a race, because of a gender, suddenly they're inherently traumatized, or that they have to be treated as individuals, that they're pro-human, as Fair for All often tries to focus on. And I think there's real power in that. It's not wimpy. It's just saying that, yes, this child may be, who knows, being oppressed by society, but at least in our school, you're a person worthy of dignity and respect and not bullying. And I think we have to create that environment where you're not inherently, there's no characteristic that we're going to assume about you because of your race, your gender identity that has some value associated with it.
I think that's a brilliant formulation. It's key to equality, I think. I read a very interesting paper once about pupil identity, which is a very interesting notion, because it's this idea, when everyone's talking about this or that identity in terms of the adult political discussion. Let's just think about pupil identity. I mean, pupils aren't like apples. They're not a fact of nature. We create that identity. And we can perhaps, I wonder what you think about posing the kind of classroom you've just described in a really kind of positive way, saying, look, we acknowledge your distress, whatever you are feeling, whatever problems you're facing at home, in the street. When you come through that door, there is another world, there is another way of being that
in
we
this
can
space.
Engage you with here. And, then you can go back to your home. And, if we've done our job well, when you go back to that home, you might just go back with a few deeper resources or a slightly different way of understanding your own situation.
So, again, I'm on the school board where I live. There's a code of conduct that's ratified every year. It's like clockwork. But this year I really read it. Now on the board, really read it for the first time. And there's basically this list of, no child can be discriminated against or no child should be bullied based on this long list, race, class, it's litany, your height, you're trying to capture. But the point is, it doesn't capture, like body odor is not on there, right? Or political persuasion is not on there.
Or something,
But the point is, we actually don't need a list of categories to define what you should not be bullied based upon. right? You should just not be bullied, period. Like, each person is worthy of dignity and respect as an individual human being, end stop, or full stop, sorry. So I'm actually going to advocate that we eliminate all of those categories. Because it actually creates special treatment. In the attempt to ensure you have an environment that's absent of bullying, you're actually creating special categories for which you're saying these are not bullied, but you're not mentioning any other categories, and that's not that's not an equal footing. We'll see how that goes.
I would love to do.
We'll see how that goes.
Email me. I'm going to be in touch with you. I really want to know the outcome of that.
Yeah, because it's much easier to say these things than in the current. I mean, for someone right now to say, "Wait a minute, you're going to take away race as a category," like, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Be bold, be brave.
Well, yes.
I really want to hear.
If one word,
fly on the wall there.
Yes.
I think because that speaks to something I think Jeremy was talking about at the beginning of the day, which is that, we're encouraging people. We're doing the opposite of encouraging people to see points of connection and commonality, and instead we're encouraging people to see themselves and in a way that reifies every single difference and encourages more and more fragmentation, I think.
Yeah. So again, the school we lead, this is what we're aspiring to. These three ideals of equality of opportunity, individual dignity, and our common humanity. Right?
Oh my God! Can we just legislate that and have that at all schools? We must have those.
Okay. Yes. Well.
Yes.
To me, it's what else would we want? Group identity, group oppression, group stereotype. No, it's this is the dehumanizing aspect that I think folks like us in the room have to figure out ways to talk about the stuff with others who use those terms and feel that they're actually being empathetic and caring and compassionate, and yet they don't realize what they're actually doing is putting kids in boxes. And so we have to figure out the language to meet people who are, I think, well-intentioned, but are not hitting the mark on recognizing the inherent dignity of each person.
Absolutely. I mean, I do want to ask you about your book as well, but I just want to share, this is not really my story. This is a story from a teacher that contacted me recently. Their school had just signed up for a 3-year course on EDI training by one of these third-party organizations.
EDI, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion?
Yeah.
I wonder why they've changed the order.
I think it kind of goes random a bit, and they...
That's interesting.
What happened? They started this training, and it's first week back at term after the summer holidays. And the head addresses the whole school assembly. And he says, I want everybody in this room to look around at the colour of the person next to you and the colour of everybody on the platform where the staff were, and notice how disgraceful it is that there are so few non-white faces here.
See, now, if I were running that school, that person wouldn't be in that position.
Well, I mean, and the thing was, right, this is
Imagine being a person on that stage.
And the one new teacher that school had hired happened to be from India. And she just was mortified. She just said, I have never felt so utterly humiliated in my life because I thought I was a teacher like everybody else. And now that head has just singled me out as the diversity tick box.
How did the audience respond?
Well, it's really interesting because it's an elite school, a private school. I mean, they're kids, right? They're not going to... But as it happens, this head is also following the advice given by this third-party organisation over which nobody in Britain has any oversight at all. Nobody knows who they are, what qualifications they've got or anything. This head they've got a PR department, and they're trying to coerce the non-white pupils to be photographed for their promotional material on the basis that that way they'll get more non-white kids coming to the school. But actually the kids don't want to do it. They're saying, you know, we're sick of being picked at. No, we don't want to come out of our lessons to go and do this photo opportunity. The teacher that came to me is trying to have discussions with the head to make it try and, you know, persuade. I don't hold much hope. I think he's fairly committed to this. She says a lot of the teachers in the school privately support her, but aren't prepared to speak out. But I just thought that is so, you know, how can you not see how cruel that is? I mean, it just seems to me to be a very cruel way to behave.
Well, unless you're rewarded for saying those things.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you, in your mind, in this head of school's mind, he probably feels he's calling out an injustice that's obvious to everyone. Everyone should know, look at the terrible nature of the fact that the predominant teachers, I presume, are mostly white, with one Indian teacher of Indian background, and no one says anything. And in fact, it might be that his board has said, this is exactly what we want you to do. We need to, you know, racially diversify our staff. And it's not that I, for example, you know, the school that we're leading, we have a racially diverse staff, but it wasn't, like, we didn't start out with this intent of, you know, X number of this, X number of that. It just, I mean, to some degree, organically happened based on the way we recruited, based on the places. And even then, you don't get it 100%, quote unquote, right. But that kind of ideology starts to imply that you've now got to create some kind of, well, if you've got a certain number of students of a certain racial background, then you need to, you know, have teachers of a certain background. I remember when I was at Teach for America many years ago, when Teach for America, most people are presumably familiar with TFA, in the early days, you know, race almost destroyed the entire organization. This was back in 95, 96. There was a lot of, you know, we have all these white teachers coming in, these well-to-do kids coming out of college, going into urban schools. And I remember Wendy Kopp said, if I remember this correctly, she said, I've been in classrooms where I've seen amazing black teachers teaching in classrooms that are predominantly black. And I've also seen white teachers who were terrible in front of black students. But I've also seen black teachers that are terrible in front of black kids, and I've seen white teachers who are amazing in front of a classroom of black kids. So let's stop making these general assumptions based on what's now called race matching. And I don't know if Wendy would say that publicly today, because the social pressure on her is to not say those things. But we used to have courage to reject these ideas that, you know, the demographic of the racial makeup of the teacher was directly linked to their ability to teach a group of kids. And I think we just need the courage to reject those kinds of ideas.
I couldn't agree more, and they're now extending that to pupils as well, that pupils can't learn unless they see their own face in the curriculum.
Well, there are whole schools of thought, particularly as it relates to black kids. I mean, there are movements that, you know, we want to have more black male teachers in elementary school in predominantly black neighborhoods. It's not inherently sure, and look, I've run elementary schools. I've tried to recruit amazing teachers of all races. It's hard to get, for example, men to enter elementary schools. But for some people who are promoting it, their underlying idea is that the reason that kids, particularly black kids, are not reading at grade levels is because they don't have enough black teachers. And I just think, on its surface, we have to reject that. It's not evident. It's not based on evidence, nor is it based on quote unquote lived experience of seeing great teachers of every hue that know how to teach children regardless of their circumstance.
Yeah, it does seem a very anti-intellectual, anti-imaginative position to take, you know, the idea that something that is essentially to do with mind is is somehow causally connected to melanin.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a lot of these anti-race. I mean, a lot of these are based on this idea that race is the single most important characteristic. And again, it's just simply not true. But something has happened in our society where we've lost courage to say that.
Yeah.
And by the silence, that's what often perpetuates the notion. And if you remember anything from this conversation, it's just the courage to push back on obvious things. When you hear ideas like that, if you actually show the courage to push back, know that many, many other people in the room who've heard the same thing that you just heard agree with you. But they were just terrified to say it. But the more and more that we are the tip of the spear and we say these things, it will give permission and courage to others to do the same.
I think so. I just want to ask you, I agree with that, but how do you keep calm? Because quite often I get really angry, but it's not, there's a lot of effort to restrain your anger and realize, actually just sometimes it's just asking a question. Like you can pose the things in a questioning way. I mean, there may be times when you're going to need to be aggressive and assertive when you're in a different audience, but if you're dealing with a colleague or a parent or a teacher, then so wait a minute, you're bringing in this new strategy because of what problem in the school?
Yeah.
And they say, oh, well, it's just racism. So, oh, well, what's happened in the school?
Yeah.
And you very soon says, nothing's happened in the school. There is no problem in the school.
My wife has said, why do you get angry more often? Or just, well, it's just not my, I just don't think you attract people if you're angry and bellicose. I just don't find it interesting when people get so angry. It's just not a good strategy. So, and to the degree I try to actually ascribe good intentions to people who I disagree with on some of these things, I think they're coming from a good place. I mean, I run schools, so I believe that most people in education want good things for kids. It's just we may have radically different ideas of how to get there. And you win some and you lose. But for me, part of it is trying to actually run institutions that I hope we're building in such a way that demonstrate that we don't have to operate with these group ideologies and assumptions. So we actually prove the point by doing it versus just talking about it.
Okay, so now you've actually touched on one of my questions that I did have for you, which is that you talk about your schools as the schools that you've set up as having a focus on character, and I think you've just exemplified a very attractive character for an educator just now. But I wonder whether you see, is a kind of focus for schools on character compatible, or can there be conflicts with the idea of schools for success and achievement? I mean, do character and academic achievement necessarily go together all the time?
Well, I would hope that the kind of success or achievement we're seeking to achieve is actually inclusive of character-based strengths. Right. So Vertex Partnership Academies, the school we just launched, is organized around the 4 cardinal virtues of courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. And those are as important as whatever academic aspirations we have. Yesterday, we, to the chagrin of our students, we started the year allowing kids to have cell phones during the day, where we basically entrusted that you could have your cell phone, but you don't pull it out during the day. Maybe it was naive, but our students quickly told us that they were pulling these things out during the day, and there were clearly behavior issues. So yesterday, we announced the new policy. All cell phones are collected on arrival, and they are, and we didn't, right, okay, well, you're clapping. That's interesting. I'd be curious to know why you're clapping. But the way we framed it for our students, in the letter to students, we said this is aligned with our cardinal virtue of temperance. of self-regulation and self-control.
Yes.
That we want you to be totally focused while you're here in school, and we believe that this device is distracting you from what's most important in school. And so, so we're trying to ground every action or decision or policy or guideline that we put forth back to these virtues. Like we have to, like they can't just be a poster on the wall. They actually have to be lived. And so that's the way in which we're trying to sort of imbue and develop character. So I don't think there's an inconsistency between success and character. I mean, there are a lot of really talented people that do really immoral things, right? So I think they have to go hand in hand.
Right. And can I ask how that's been received? I mean, do you have most of the staff on board with you in this way of thinking?
For the most part, you try to get it right. Historically, when I started running schools back in 2010, and when I was hiring teachers, the two things we were really looking for was subject matter knowledge and pedagogical practice, right? Do they know their stuff, and do they have the ability to teach? Now there's really a third element, and that's ideology. Because so many more educators are coming in with a much more explicit social justice agenda, where they have been grounded in these ideas where race matters significantly, gender matters, and there are all these social forces that they, as the teacher, have to now be the ones who are protecting kids against all these forces of oppression. So, we don't always get it right. Paul, I think, is in the room where we've actually had this discussion, you work towards it, and you want to make sure everyone that's on the bus is, I think we're definitely making progress there, which I think is good. But it's probably one of the biggest challenges now, making sure that everyone that you're hiring is actually on board. Because, teaching, once you close the door, you could be doing whatever you want to some degree. And so there's a great level of, we have observations and all that, but still, we put a great level of trust that the teachers in your building are focused on the highest of expectations. They're not so focused on the gender or race of their kids to the point where it's distracting them from the purpose that they're there in the first place.
No, that's just so interesting.
Are you experiencing, it feels like in education here in the US, it dominates, Are you, George Floyd was this worldwide phenomena. Are you seeing the same thing in Great Britain?
Yes, I think it predates, not the social justice agenda, but the kind of instrumentalization of education for economic reasons, for political reasons. Mm-hmm. In Britain, it's been happening, I argue, in something I'm just writing at the moment, that it's really started from the 70s to be explicit in policy. It started with when the then Prime Minister, James Callaghan, argued that education had to align itself, but he was talking about universities, had to better meet the needs of business people. And then after that, it then sort of rolled down to, colleges, schools, yep. To the point now where, you have, 5-year-olds, there's this idea of we need to teach 5-year-olds how to set up bank accounts and how to do all this stuff that they're going to need when they're adults. And it seems like socially relevant knowledge, but I'm kind of thinking, isn't something really lost here? Isn't, a few hundred years worth of achievement in knowledge in different disciplines that takes time to, climate. So I'm going off the point here, but to answer your question, that burden of putting everything onto education is, I think, there comes a point, I mean, you could argue, well, there's always been an instrumental reason for education. There has. But as long as it coexists with
other strong institutions.
With other things and other values of valuing education in its own sake, for its own sake, then you can have a creative tension. But when you get to a tipping point where, like I think Joanna was saying earlier, where knowledge itself kind of is lost, education as a unique endeavour is lost. That special, almost sacred. And, you know, this isn't just me being religious. This is like Durkheim was talking about, you know, education taking on the role that churches used to play. If that's lost, then you kind of have the way open to any old rubbish that's
I agree. I mean, not to get to my book, but you know, I have a framework.
No.
It's actually
that was my next question.
No. But the truth is, like, the framework that I put forth in my book is called FREE: Family, Religion, Education, Entrepreneurship. It's not E. It's not. It's our institutions are codependent, and while we need a strong educational system, it's necessary but insufficient if we have the full expectation of transforming our society positively for the rising generation. We need other institutions to do their job.
Could you say a bit more about, because your book is called, let me see if I've got this right, Agency, is that right? The 4 points for agency: family, religion, education, and enterprise for all, how to overcome victimhood. So could you say a bit about how each of those, the acronym, fits into education and fits into overcoming the valorization of victimhood?
So I've had a really great career over the last 20, 30 years. I was, Teach for America in the early days. I was at MTV for 6 years in a completely different setting. I was at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I was at the White House, and I've run public charter schools in the heart of the South Bronx since 2010. And I've had the benefit of seeing a wide range of kids in different settings: rich kids, poor kids, black kids, white kids, kids in homeless shelters, kids in foster care, and what's always been interesting to me is that there's some children, as they rise up into young adulthood and they come from challenging situations, they recreate the same challenges that they were born in. And the cycle of poverty, the cycle of deprivation, all those things just perpetuates across a generation. And yet there are other kids who are in those same situations, as they rise into young adulthood, make different sets of decisions that lead them to flourishing. And so the question is, what makes the difference? Why does that happen? And honestly, it's probably the animating question of my life. What makes the difference? Is it replicable? Is it just random? Is there anything that's repeatable for those kids who seem to be able to thwart the conditions that they were born or raised in? And my experience has been that the kids who seem to make the decisions as they enter young adulthood have what I call a sense of agency, where I define agency as the force of your free will guided by moral discernment, right? This idea that every human being, every young person has free will. The question is, how do you wield it? How do you exercise it? And so if you take free will like a vector, some of you heard me speak before, like free will, or think of agency like a vector, like velocity. Like velocity is not just speed, it's speed and direction, right? So there's some force telling you left or right or wrong, right? And but where does that come from? And so the kids that I have seen make dramatic changes in terms of creating generational advantage, in my view, in my experience, have been embraced 4 pillars. First is family, and it's not about the family that they're from, It's about the family that they have formed. Right? So they have made decisions about usually their education, work, and if they've had children, marriage first. Right? Or they've done the education and work part and they're waiting, but somehow the stability of the family that they have created for themselves is dramatically different from whatever they may have emerged from. And we can talk about that. And it's the foundation, right? As I've said to Beth and Andrew, my framework is not called ERF. It's not EERF, it's FREE, where family is the foundation. So they've created a much stronger family base for themselves. Second, they've usually had some kind of personal faith commitment. It's just, again, this is not a judgment, this is just what I have observed of those young people who seem to be grounded in a moral code of how to live their life. Third, they've usually had access to some kind of educational freedom, charter school, school choice, vouchers, something that gave them the ability, or their parents, or their caretakers, whomever, the ability to place them in a great school so they weren't relegated to whatever their government-run school was in their neighborhood. And then lastly, the last E is for entrepreneurship, meaning that they have a problem-solving mindset, where I consider entrepreneurship not just starting your own business, but this ability to see issues, see problems, and create solutions where those may not have existed before. This kind of entrepreneurial mindset around your life. And so when I first started writing my book, Agency, I did not have this framework in my mind. The free came to me after I started to reflect on what is it that I had experienced in seeing young people I've worked with from every type of background. So that's, and I offer up free, it's so interesting. I don't think that these are particularly brilliant observations, like family, sure, religion, sure, education, sure. It's obvious, but yet we're in a time where saying this is a radical concept. Like family, last thing, and then you speak. So family matters, right? So the National Assessment for Educational Progress, what's often referred to as the nation's report card, this past Monday just released the results of educational outcomes for 4th graders and 8th graders in the most recent set of reading and math outcomes for the country. And not surprisingly, devastating results, massive declines. Literally every single state had reductions in performance. And of course, everyone said, well, the racial achievement gap has increased. All these negative outcomes, the racial achievement gaps, because white kids are also like only something like 38% of white kids are reading at grade level. So the achievement gap, the gaps between race are not the issue. The gaps between everyone and 100%. But, I did this very rudimentary analysis by family structure, looking at what were the outcomes of kids who have both a father and a mother in the home. And NAEP, the data's a little wonky, but still, going through this analysis, the kid who has a mother and father at home has at least double the performance of any other kind of family structure based on this aggregate data. And we need to dive in more and do more research on it, but it's intuitively obvious, right? But when you look at the narrative of the discussion around NAEP, no one's talking about the importance of family structure. Everyone's talking about, well, it's racist, so we need more we need more anti-bias, or we need more black teachers in elementary school. The thing that is most obvious is not spoken about. And so I have offered up my framework, hopefully as an empowering alternative, to help young people think differently about the levers that they do control in their own lives, that can help them wield their free will in such a way that can lead to a life of flourishing.
Thank you. Now I want to ask you a bit more about the family.
Yes.
Because in Britain, and also I suppose personally from my own background, if you like, which was first wave or second wave feminism, I guess. There's a slight resistance to, when you say family structure, and I've been trying to work this through in my own head, thinking, you know, is it just the structural thing, or is it something about something like I think Jeremy talked about this morning about the prior values, and is there something like, and I think sociologically it's a fairly well-established or accepted premise that the closer there is, the closer value alignment there is between home's idea of education and what the educators are doing, the more chances there are of success, which is why they say probably more middle-class kids are successful, because middle-class values tend to align more easily with those of school, of educators. So is it the structure or is it the values? And how do you see, are they connected? Are they independent variables? Or?
No, it's a good question. I think it very much has to do with structure, although not exclusively. In the sense of, like when you say middle class alignment, well, if you're middle class in the United States, or certainly upper class, you usually have some greater ability to either move to a neighborhood where you will find a school that's aligned to your values, or you have access to choice in some way, whether, again, charter school, voucher school, private school, religious school, that you make the proactive effort to seek out a school that is aligned with what you are seeking to accomplish. So it's not, the reason family is so important is that so many of the other things that people are advocating for are the things that more organically happen primarily in a married two-parent household. Doesn't mean it can't happen in a single-parent household, and believe me, I have many single parents in my schools who are incredible and determined. They will walk through broken glass for their children to make sure their kids have a much better opportunity than they might have had. But the data is overwhelming of what are the environments that are better for kids. And strong families can take many forms, but there's no question that a married two-parent household, it just makes a huge difference. In the Black community in the United States, the poverty rate of married Black parents has been in single digits for, I think, as long as the records have been kept. And yet, almost never, is that spoken about when we're talking about things like the racial wealth gap or, you know, deep poverty. It's like, well, maybe if it's not a silver bullet, but maybe if we talked more about the importance of family as the foundational element for almost every social pathology that we're concerned with: incarceration, crime, healthcare. You reverse integrate, you will see that kids coming out. I'm actually doing a presentation for a medical school in November, and one of the things we're going to talk about is how the social determinants of health, similarly to the social determinants of education, often link back to strong families as either being a wellspring of positive, nurturing environments for kids or not, and that leads you on a certain pathway. So family is foundational. Where this gets controversial is so here in the States, there's something called the success sequence. Do you know about that?
No.
Right. I actually think there's been a study of the success sequence in Britain, which shows the same thing.
Okay.
Which basically says if you finish just your high school degree, then get a full-time job of any kind, just so you learn the dignity and discipline of work. And then if you have children, marriage first. Amongst millennials, 97% of kids who follow that series of decisions avoid poverty. And I've often felt, it's not 100%, but I've often felt, well, this seems like information that kids should learn in school. And I face enormous pushback. You can't teach that. These kids, you'll embarrass them, you'll shame them, because maybe their parents didn't follow this so-called success sequence. And anyway, the real issue is systemic racism or something else. So why even, let's not talk about it at all. And so again, for me, it's like, so you want to be a gatekeeper. And by the way, many of the people who are often saying that you can't teach these things are people who in their own personal lives have followed the success sequence.
Yeah.
And so they are personally benefiting from these behaviors which they think somehow are off limits for teaching young kids who aren't seeing these kind of behaviors. There's a new book called Of Boys and Men by Richard Reeves, who's a great colleague, and one of the points he makes is marriage is kind of dead. It's a model based on economic dependency, and really what boys should prioritize is fatherhood and not marriage. Like, so you want me to tell the 14-year-old boys in my new high school, fatherhood, that's what you should focus on. That may not elicit the kind of behaviors that we want for young men.
Yeah, I can see the problem there. I mean, it does. I mean, I think it's fascinating. The one thing that strikes me is, from everything you've said, is the need for courage to talk about things that have been taboo.
Yes.
And I'm working through that myself in relation to the family. Also, for example, in relationship to language, because there's quite a lot of academic literature that has said, the way mothers speak to children then informs, as babies and toddlers. And I was really very skeptical of this because I'm thinking this is just kind of blaming mums. It's kind of like, mums might be very busy doing lots of things. And besides which, my mother never read to me, and I, gone on to do all my studies and everything. So there's this thing, we're also sort of like looking for a single solution.
Yeah.
I think, because, when I grew, I'm of a generation where parents didn't read to their kids, yet we had really good literacy rates. And that was because, well, not literacy, but also a general love of literature or an acceptance that literature was a good thing.
But where did that
come
come
from? Schools
from?
were doing it. I think it was because, when I was thinking about this, I think my experiences as an immigrant child going to in an all-white area in a majority-white school was that I never thought of myself as brown until I was about 12 or something. And my school days at school, we would sing hymns. Every morning in assembly, we would all sing beautiful hymns, and I still can't hear Morning is Broken without welling up, because it just really reminds me. And we would do, in class, teachers would read poetry or read us stories with no other purpose than to just read to us. And there was this kind of freedom, I think, of imagination. And through that, we actually, and they spoke in not really formal Queen's English, but they spoke properly. There was a difference between your home dialect or the language outside and then entering into school, which is a more formal world.
Right.
And I think without being taught it explicitly, me and my generation at school was sensitized to different modalities of language, and it's to do with the complexities of human interaction, whereas everything today seems really like it's all, teachers have to be down with the kids. They have to.
Right.
The language in schools is like you can't. You listen to teachers, and I'm like horrified. I'm thinking, no, shut up! I don't stop speaking, please.
How did they dress? How did your teachers dress?
Well, I mean, unless you go to a school that has a very intentional uniform dress policy, sometimes you can't tell the difference between the older kids and the teachers.
See, I think that's a problem.
I totally agree.